Yalnız ahireti görmek isteyenlerse dünyayı göremiyor. Halbuki insanın gözünde öyle bir gözlük olmalıdır ki dünyayı yani zahiri şekli görmesi manayı görmesine, manayı görmesi de şekli görmesine mani olmasın. Her mülkün ve servetin sahibinin Allah olduğunu, dünyanın da senin de bir hiç olduğunu ve düşünme aletinden başka bir şey olmadığını, var sanılan varlıkların cümlesinin bir gölgeden ibaret bulunduğunu ve mevcudun yalnız Allah olduğunu bilmek kafidir diyor hocam. İnşallah diyelim ve oturuma başlayalım. Cangüzel Zülfikar, Oturum Başkanı. Sachiko Murata ve Chittick, Çin Müslümanlığında tasavvufun önemini anlatacaklar. Ernst, Kenan Rifai'nin Mesnevî Şerhinde Öğretme Metodları adlı tebliğini sunacak ve Cemâlnur Sargut hocam, Kenan Rifai'nin Bakışıyla Dünün, bugünün ve yarının değerlendirmesini yapacak bizlere. Buyurun efendim.
Herkes gelene kadar. Efendim ben 2 kişiyi anmayı...
As we wait for people to come, I have actually forgotten to mention 2 people. Let me commemorate them. The architect that really took a very leading role in the construction of Dergah, Selim Bey, such a humble character he is. And the second one is Tayfur, another architect. With all his contributions, we have been able to, all their competitions, we have been able to actually construct the dergah. So it's our duty actually to respect those who have taken role in doing some things. Now, there is Esin Çelebi, a very respectful, prominent friend of mine. I think we are coming from the same family. It is also Samiha Anne's saying that we come from the same family. Samiha Anne said for Esin Çelebi, with her look, with her style, with her dressing, she's always very, with her femininity, she's always an example. So there is no difference actually. Chittick will be talking in a minute. I remember a very beautiful word from him. They actually asked Chittick, did Ibn Arabi, was Ibn Arabi influenced by Mevlana, or was Mevlana influenced by Ibn Arabi? And the answer is beautiful. They are both actually affected by the same source. Why would they actually be affected by each other? So again, Samiha Ayverdi and Esin Çelebi are the same sources. May Allah not separate us from their meaning, inshallah.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I was a hidden treasure, and I wished to be loved and to be known. This is the manifestation of the hadith that we are experiencing today. And the International Kenan Rifai Symposium had a very diverse program between the dates of 29th of May to the 31st, which, thank God, has reached the 9th and final session. And even though I am not at all entitled or in a position of ever presenting them in whichever way possible, I will be reading the words of Kenan Rifai to introduce them to you. And the words of them are in the page 287. I would like to mention it as a help to our interpreters. 29th of May 1453 is the conquest of Istanbul. God be content with them. We have been in the tomb of Merkez Müslümanlığında Musa Efendi Hazretleri on that very day, on Friday, on 29th of May 2015. We have entered the door of grace, opening on the day of conquest, and for the last 3 days we had the joy and ecstasy of a great festival and a wedding. Let God allow us to have their breath and life in our own lives. And everybody knows Hazreti Merkez Efendi has 2 short anecdotes that I want to share with you here, that I will link to Hazreti Kenan afterwards. And when the students were picking up daisies in a field, one of them brings a dried chamomile, a dried daisy, and he says, I have seen all the flowers in zikr, reciting the name of God, so I couldn't bring myself to pick them. This one was dry, that is why I could only bring this to you. And the Hoja asks, if God Almighty's power of creation were given to you, what would you have done? One says, I would create only the good ones. One says, I would create more of the good ones. And then the word comes to Müslümanlığında Merkez, and he says, when a bad died, I would create another bad. And when a good died, I will create another good, because that's the order of God. I would not divert the will and order of God. That is how he was named with the nickname of Merkez, the center. The issue is about being an Ehli Tevhid at the center, with total surrender, holding on to that center. Now that we always talk of Mevlana, let us be holding on to that center. That is what my will and intention is. Our Murshid has said, let you open yourself from the truth. You will find the true path. There might be some decaying or hurting suspicions that might come to you. You will be losing, and try to take your part. Try to fill the container of your heart while the flood of grace and mercy is pouring over you. Because if you wait for the perfect one, there will be no container left for you. Know that the discourse and the sohbet of the erenler, hak erenler, is their light. See the spiritual nur, the holy nur in their eyes, reflected in their presence and being. The first presentation will be by Professor Sachiko Murata and Professor Dr. William Chittick. And they will be talking about the Islam religion and the prominent, one of the most prominent scholars of Tasavvuf, and we shall not only benefit from their works and experience of their life, but we will also learn what will they say with the vision of Kenan Rifai. Sachiko Murata is an Islamic research expert, and she worked in the Beijing University in the Muslim Confucians, and the main issues of Islamic thought were her topics of teaching in that university. And a major scholar, Huri, from the Mevlana school, and with Professor Chittick and Daiwan Yu, was what they have used as reading material. And William Chittick is a researcher of Islam, and he has authored many works, and he was also a professor. He also worked as a professor of Islam in Beijing University for a year in 2012, and he has studied the works and approaches of major mutasawwifs, and both of them have have come from New York Stony Brook University. And I would like to share one witnessing that I have had with them. And Sachiko, after the North Carolina branch was opened, she visited them, and Sachiko found out about the speech in North Carolina by our Hoja, Cemâlnur Hoja, and she gets too excited and says, whatever needs to be done for that thought, let us do it, and I'm ready for all sorts of help. What did Miss Cemâlnur said in Chapel Hill in the opening ceremony?
Ki efendim bizim bu
at the opening of the chair, and she said we have to expand this work in all parts of the world. We have to start new chairs in all the universities. And Ibn Arabi tells us that the last perfected human, insan-ı kamil, will manifest, and we have to do it even in China, she said. And of course we took it for real. We said, of course, whatever our Hoja says shall manifest and realize. So we said, of course, and we took it very normally. But other people who don't know her that well said, what are you talking about? A chair in China? And they didn't understand it. But later, talking with Professor Chittick, and we had the relationships with China, and it has become a reality afterwards. So Professor Murata and Professor Chittick will now give their presentation about importance of tasawwuf in Chinese Islam. The podium is yours, professors. Teşekkürler.
Those kind words. And thank you for inviting us. This is really a great pleasure, a great honor, and we're overwhelmed by the generosity and kindness and expression of love that we meet here. Both of us would talk, but I think given the time limits, we better only have one speaker. So let me sum up quickly what we would like to say, but this is we work together on this paper. Cemâlnur Hoca asked us to speak about the significance of the Kenan Rifai chair in China. Now, as was just explained, we inaugurated that chair in 2002 at the Institute of Advanced Humanistic Studies in Beijing University, the most important university in China. The institute was founded by Professor Du Weiming in 2010 shortly after he returned from China after teaching for 30 years at Harvard University. We spent a semester there. We taught 2 courses. We attended many seminars. We organized a seminar conference. We had many good students. I just want to say a few words about what the significance of that chair is. Now, from the outset, it was our understanding that the first task of a chair like this should be to help the Chinese Muslims re-establish the links with their own intellectual tradition. Now, it is perhaps unnecessary to point out that the 20th century was disastrous for Islam in China. Muslims had lived in China for 1,500 years and had founded flourishing communities in many parts of the country. Today, there are at least 40 million. I mean, the official number is 20 million, but everyone else estimates something higher. After the Communist Revolution of 1949, all forms of religion and tradition were treated as the enemy in practice, if not in theory. Islam was singled out for special persecution, not least because it has always been considered a foreign import. Still today, many Muslims hide their Islamic identity because of the severe prejudice against Muslims. Now, one of the results of the persecution for 70 years was that a generation of scholars, at least one, perhaps 2 generations of scholars, was lost. And the intellectual links with the past were broken. When China opened up to the West, to the outside world 30 years ago, Muslim communities were able to send students abroad with the aim of regaining Islamic knowledge. A new generation of scholars and ulama has appeared, but they have received their training in places like Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. They have some knowledge of Quran, Hadith, and Sharia, but they tend to be indoctrinated with the ideologies of the Islamist movements, political Islam. Moreover, they have no training in the intellectual fields like Sufism and philosophy. And it is the Sufi and philosophical dimensions of Islam that had determined the nature of Islam of their ancestors. In other words, the new ulama come back to China without the Islamic learning that would allow them to understand the teachings of the great Chinese Muslims of the past. Now, perhaps the best way to understand the difference between the new forms of Islam in China and the Islam of the past is to observe the difference between the traditional and the modern architecture of Chinese mosques and madrasas. Wherever there are sizable Muslim populations, new mosques are sprouting up like mushrooms. Financed mostly by Saudi money, these are gaudy concrete monstrosities. In contrast, the few old mosques that were not destroyed during the Cultural Revolution are barely distinguishable from Confucian, Taoist, and Buddhist temples. They are beautiful examples of traditional Chinese architecture, seamlessly integrated with their natural and social surroundings. They illustrate the Far Eastern and Islamic ideal of balance and harmony, an ideal that is, of course, displayed in mosques all over the Islamic world. In the Chinese case, you can only recognize that they are mosques from up close, when much of the calligraphy, which looks like Chinese turns out to be Arabic. The insides of these mosques are unquestionably Muslim places of prayer, even if the general ambiance is fully harmonious with traditional Chinese forms. Now, the contrast between traditional and modern Chinese mosques is reflected in the intellectual discord between traditional and modern Chinese Islam. The old-style Islamic thoughts fits seamlessly into Far Eastern civilization, and the new style attacks traditional Chinese and Islamic forms like noxious and destructive weeds. Traditional Chinese Islam harmonizes with Chinese civilization for one main reason, which is that it is thoroughly imbued with the inner dimension of Islamic teachings, what is commonly called Tasavvuf. This rootedness allowed the Chinese Muslims to see the splendor of the truth resonating in Chinese civilization. They took seriously the teaching that God sent prophets to all peoples, and they saw prophetic wisdom in Chinese forms, even if they thought that most Chinese had lost touch with the real meaning of that wisdom. The ability to see into and beyond external forms is, of course, a hallmark of Sufi teachers throughout Islamic history. We've heard a lot about that in the last 2 days. We were introduced, the two of us, to Chinese Islam in 1994 when we attended a conference on the dialogue between Confucian and Islamic civilization in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. One of the Chinese presenters gave a paper on Wang Dayu, who wrote the first book on Islam in the Chinese language, published in 1642. We were fascinated by the paper. And upon returning to the United States, Dr. Murata found several Chinese books by Wang Dayu and other Muslims in the Yenqing Library at Harvard. We decided to study one of the books of Wang Dayu, and Professor Du Weiming, who had also attended the conference in Kuala Lumpur, agreed to read the text along with us. As we gradually discovered, Wang Dayu stood at the beginning of a movement that lasted into the beginning of the 20th century, though it was largely eclipsed by the turmoil that followed. Modern scholars have commonly called this movement the Han Kitab, that is Chinese Arabic, the Chinese books. Dozens of Muslim scholars after Wang Dayu published Chinese language books on Islam, and these scholars came to be known as the Huiru, the Muslim Confucians. They were called Confucian because of their firm grounding in the Confucian classics and their remarkable ability to express the teachings of Islam in the language that had been familiar to the intellectual elite of China for centuries. Professor Du was a very, very busy man, and he always has been. Professor Du agreed to assist us in our study of Wang Dayu because he, like us, recognized in these texts an example of religious dialogue much more profound and meaningful than the sort of discussions that usually go on today. We found this especially true when, after 5 years of studying Wang Dayu, we turned our full attention to a second Muslim scholar, Liu Ji, who began publishing at the beginning of the 18th century. He is a perfect example of a Muslim Confucian. He was thoroughly versed in Neo-Confucianism, which is the school of thought that has dominated East Asian intellectual history over the past 1,000 years. This is a form of Confucianism that integrates Taoism and Buddhism and developed many, many teachings about the Tao, the universe, and the relationship, the interrelationship between man and the cosmos. Luci, on the basis of his profound Islamic and Confucian learning, wrote a trilogy about Islamic teachings. The first volume deals with the overall worldview of Islam. The second with the rationale behind Islamic rituals and social practices. And the third with the life of the Prophet, who is the embodiment of Islamic theory and practice. Now, in order to understand the significance of the Muslim Confucian synthesis developed by Wang Dayu, Liu Ji, and many others, we need to keep in mind the manner in which Islamic thought developed over history, especially in the Persianate lands of Islam, which extended from Albania to China, including Turkey, of course, where Persian was even more important than Arabic in many ways. For example, although Al-Ghazali was widely known and universally recognized as a great synthesizer of the various branches of Islamic learning, his influence was overshadowed by later figures who wrote books addressed to a wider audience. Some of the best examples of these later authors are poets like Mevlana and Hafiz, who were among the most influential propagators of the mature Islamic worldview. This poetry is permeated with explanations of key themes of Islamic thought, but it is readily accessible to any Persian speaker. Throughout most of the Persianate lands, Mevlana was a far more influential teacher of Islam than Al-Ghazali was, even if we have not yet found much evidence that the Persian poets were important in China. And for that matter, Al-Ghazali was almost unknown in China. The most influential author among the Confucian Muslims seems to have been Ibn Arabi. No surprise, I think. As seen through the filter of Persian authors, books written by Aziz Nasafi and Abdurrahman Jami, and I could talk for hours about these two, but now, these are two of the major scholars whose books were translated into Chinese. The third scholar, and we only have three, only 4 books before the 20th century were translated from Persian Arabic into Chinese. The third scholar was Najmuddin Razi, the author of Mirsad al-Ibad, which became the most popular textbook of Islamic teachings among the Chinese Muslims. And it's a wonderful, wonderful book explaining the whole vision of Islam. Now, Ibn Arabi's popularity throughout the Persianate world derived from the fact that he offered a vision of God, of the universe, and the human soul that was far more comprehensive than that offered by any other Muslim thinker before or after him. The major characteristic of the worldview that he developed, the broad outlines of which were shared by most other Muslim scholars, can be called anthropocosmism, a heavy word. But our friend Professor Lu Weiming uses this word to describe the Far Eastern worldview as developed by the great Neo-Confucian thinkers. An anthropocosmic vision is one that looks at the universe and the human self as two sides of the same living reality. Now, the Muslim Confucians recognize that this Islamic anthropocosmic vision translated easily into Confucian terminology because of the parallels with Chinese thought. If they base their major teachings on specific texts by Nasafi, Jami, and Razi, it was precisely because these texts provided clear and systematic examples of the Islamic anthropocosmic vision. Well, if you ask Muslims today which Arabic text should be translated into other languages, most would respond, oh, Quran, Hadith, Fiqh, perhaps Kalam, maybe Al-Ghazali. The Confucian Muslims, however, did not translate any Arabic books I mean, bits and, of course, they quoted Quran, but they never translated the whole thing. They read Arabic. They were ulama. They knew very good Arabic. But the issue for them was not, what do you need to know to be a scholar of Islam? The issue was, what does the Muslim community need to know to understand the Islamic worldview and to live in accordance with the Islamic worldview? No, it is good to teach people how to say their prayers and perform the rituals, recite the Quran, and observe Islamic law. But how do you explain to them, in their own language, the necessity of doing these teachings? In other words, you cannot simply tell people that you must do X, Y, and Z because God says so, even if most mullahs tell people exactly that. If people are to accept and follow certain guidelines, they must have good reasons to do so, given that the Islamic guidelines shape every dimension of human life. The rationale needs to be stronger than the rationale for anything else. This was the quandary faced by the Confucian Muslims. The Muslims in China, I should say. How do you explain convincingly, in the Chinese language, the worldview lying behind Islamic ritual and social teachings? How do you explain Tawheed in Chinese? The Huiru solved their quandary by writing and translating books that explain the meaning of existence, the role of human beings in the universe, the consequences of human actions, and the necessity for prophetic guidance. In order to carry these ideas over into the Chinese language, they had to be masters of Chinese thought, and that meant thorough familiarity, not only with Neo-Confucianism, but also with Taoism and Buddhism. These issues of the meaning of human life and the reasons for existence are precisely the issues that are addressed most clearly, most specifically by the Sufi teachers. Now, let us conclude by saying that the 400 years between the death of Al-Ghazali and the death of Abdurrahman Jami was one of the most creative and productive periods in Islamic intellectual history. Practically all of the great philosophers, theologians, Sufis, and poets who appeared during this period saw reality in terms of an anthropocosmic vision. And it was this vision that they expressed in their works. They understood the goal of human life to be the achievement of a transformed perception of reality in which man and the universe function in perfect harmony. They saw the road leading to this vision as embodied in the prophets, beginning with Adam and culminating with Muhammad, and including Confucius. Without knowledge of the manner in which these Muslim sages and thinkers expressed this unitary anthropocosmic vision, and how they understood it as the very vision of the Quran, it is impossible to see that the line of transmission of Islamic thought from Al-Ghazali down to Wan Dayu, Liu Qi, and other Muslim Confucians is unbroken. If Chinese Muslims today cannot grasp that the principles and most of the details of their ancestors' thought are drawn directly from sophisticated expressions of the Islamic vision written by great Muslim scholars, they will imagine that they must reject their own intellectual heritage. They will try to reinvent the Islamic vision on the basis of learning imported from the West and from the various politicized forms of Islam that dominate so much of contemporary discourse in the Middle East. It is the task of the Kenan Rifai Chair in China to remind Chinese Muslims of the rich resources for understanding the human situation that are already present in their own language. Thank you.
Efendim, şimdi
Now I would like to talk about Professor Dr. Carl Ernst, and he is from the University of North Carolina. He is our esteemed professor. All I have to say about him is that I have met him in 2001 thanks to Cemâlnur Hoca, and I get very excited getting the books signed by the writers, and the Guide to Sufism was his book that I've taken to him for a signature, and he has said to me, with best wishes from Carl, who is one of the lowest creatures of God, is what he has signed his book as.
Thank you very much indeed, and it's such a privilege to be with you all, and I'm very grateful for the invitation, and it's also a special pleasure to be on the platform with my dear friends Bill and Sachiko, and my remarks will follow up on theirs in certain important subjects. We have been talking for the last few days. I'm just joining you rather late today to join the conversation about the intellectual, educational, cultural, spiritual legacy of Kenan Rifai. His impact is quite evident today in a rich collection of programs that have been supported by the Turkish Women Cultural Association and other friends and supporters over the past decade. And I have been fortunate to participate in many of these events during the past 10 years. It seems to me that the key themes that emerge from these events have been a linkage of two important forces. First, the teaching tradition of Sufism, Tasavvuf, which was maintained and continued by Kenan Rifai in the turbulent years of the early 20th century. And second, the humanistic institution of scholarship on religious studies in the modern university. I've been aware of the intersection of these forces for some time. As many of you know, my own teacher in the academy was the late Professor Annemarie Schimmel, which my friend Jim Morris mentioned earlier today, who had such a strong connection to Turkey and its spiritual culture. And it's significant that her engagement with the world of Turkish Sufism came with the help of Samiha Ayverdi, a key figure in the line of Kenan Rifai and a founder of Turkkad. Indeed, Annemarie dedicated her book, My Soul is a Woman, to the memory of Samiha Ayverdi. It's also important to note that Annemarie Schimmel was internationally renowned in the study of religion for her work on the phenomenology of religion, and I want to underline that she was an expert on theories of religion as well as the deep intellectual traditions of Islam. Kenan Rifai as a teacher had an impact through his personal contact with numerous students and also through a number of his literary productions which have been discussed in other papers of the conference, including the commentary on the Masnawi. I'd like to just start off with a couple of brief remarks on passages in the Masnawi that reveal some important insights into his philosophy of teaching, and then I would like to connect those to the important professorial chairs that have been established in the name of Kenan Rifai in North Carolina and Beijing. It's my belief that these academic endowments, named after this modern Sufi leader, can serve as the focus of significant new initiatives in international education that will connect us in ways that have not been previously attempted. In short, the legacy of Sufi ethics, akhlaq, combined with the spirit of open inquiry of the modern university, has the potential to open up new possibilities of community that are not constrained by narrow concepts of nationality, ethnicity, or religion. The first text I'd like to consider comes from Kenan Rifai's commentary on the Masnawi. And in that great classic of Sufi literature, it's very striking the number of passages that feature dramatic conversations between Rumi and his leading disciple, Husamuddin Çelebi. In fact, it was Husamuddin who evidently inspired Rumi to compose the massive collection of Sufi wisdom, so much so that Rumi considered the idea of calling the text the Hosami Name, naming it after his disciple. While there are a number of remarkable exchanges between Rumi and Husamuddin in the Masnawi, I would just like to mention two that have special reference to the concept of pedagogy, of teaching. Here's one example. As is well known, of course, Rumi had a very special relationship with Shams Tabrizi, and sometimes he would become distant and refuse to answer questions when the name of Shams was mentioned because it was such a powerful association. Yet on other occasions he would soften, and in this text he pointed to Husamuddin as the next model of the spiritual path. He says, and I'm quoting from Victoria Holbrook here, "Don't enter this valley without evidence. Like God's friend, say, I do not love the things that set. Go by the shadow and find yourself a sun. Grab the skirt of Shah Shams of Tabriz. Hold firm if you don't know the way to this wedding feast. Learn it from Ziaul Haq Husamuddin." Now, Kenan Rifai's comment on this passage is the following. "The sun in the sky may bring an understanding person to know God, but if you find a son like Shams of Tabriz, you will learn the realities from closer up. Bind yourself tightly to his commands and warnings. Shams of Tabriz brings one to union with God, the truth, but if you can't find him, ask the ray of God, Husamuddin." What is striking here is the recognition of the student of the next generation, Husamuddin Çelebi, as a spiritual leader in his own right. The process of education is not intended as a glorification of the teacher, but as a process of sharing and increasing knowledge in the student. The same technique is signaled in Rumi's dialogue with Husamuddin about the composition of the Masnawi, when Rumi briefly comments, "Dawn is here, O safekeeper of the morning. Ask pardon from my master Husamuddin." Now, why does he say this? Kenan Rifai comments, "Hazrat Mevlana often composed the spiritual couplets at night, and dawn would break while he improvised verses, and Çelebi was the one who wrote them down, but the raging overflow of that city of gnosis and wisdom couldn't be stopped. On the morning of yet another such night, Hazrat Mevlana, again fired up with such ecstasy and passion, requested the honor, respect, and reparation he showed his great disciple from God the truth, and thus he declared to all the world the value of his great disciple. What Mevlana meant to say here is, my God, I don't have the strength to thank Hossamuddin for such service, to ask his pardon, just as you forget the flaws in worship of you and take your believing bondsmen into the city of your mercy, take on the request of pardon for this too. So here too, Rumi makes his student a partner in his teaching and worthy of respect. I cite these revealing passages here because they are prominent examples of a Sufi teaching technique occurring in a key text that Kenan Rifai wanted to explain to his own students. Education must focus on its audience, rather than merely asserting the authority of the teacher. So, what are the educational needs that have to be addressed today, and who is our audience? Now, Kenan Rifai lived during a time of immense cultural and political upheaval, which witnessed the end of the Ottoman Empire and the establishment of a secular Turkish Republic. The Sufi tariqats were abolished and their tekkes were closed in 1925. His reaction to this transformation was not despair at the end of the old order. He saw the situation as an opportunity to apply the ethical teachings of Sufism to a wider world. This may be understood, or I could introduce a phrase that we see here, a post-tariqat form of Sufism. This is not to say that the traditions of the great Sufi orders of the past had become irrelevant. Rather, it was necessary to reformulate the teachings of Sufism in a changed social and political milieu where the old institutions no longer existed. In some respects, this post-tariqat Sufism is a return to the earliest phases of the Sufi tradition, in which figures like Rumi and Shams inspired each other, rather than adhering to a rigid concept of a master-disciple relationship. Although the institutionalization of Sufism had formalized and solidified spiritual authority in the metaphorical constructions of the tree, the shajara, or the chain, the silsila, the testimony of Sufi leaders from the pre-Mongol era indicates that in those times, Sufi teaching was a process of spiritual interaction that was fluid and less structured. Such also seems to be the case with Kenan Rifai in his own Sufi training. We are told that once his teacher Hamza Rifai said to him, "I do not know who is whose murshid, you mine or I yours." This self-effacing statement signaled a recognition that Sufism was not to be the assertion of the teacher's superior position, but instead an openness to a relationship that was mutual and beneficial. In any case, the focus of Kenan Rifai's activity as a teacher was unmistakably a new response to drastically changed conditions in two chief ways. First, in distinction to the strongly patriarchal tendencies of previous generations, Kenan Rifai saw the need to bring capable women into prominence as some of his leading students. This open acknowledgement of the spiritual potential of women was a major shift of emphasis from the pre-modern situation. Second, throughout his life, Kenan Rifai was dedicated to education in modern establishments that had a global and cosmopolitan perspective. Both of these features are indicative of a response to the changing conditions of modernity that takes account of the need to reformulate practices and teachings of the past. So this brings me to the important subject of the Kenan Rifai professorial chairs established at the University of North Carolina and Peking University. The creation of these chairs, which is due to the generosity of many dedicated supporters here in Turkey, is a momentous and transformative development. It is not easy to find parallels for this admirable commitment at the international level for an initiative that is so clearly inspired by the ethical ideals of Sufism. And let me take the opportunity now on behalf of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill to express our immense thanks and gratitude to all who contributed to making possible the Kenan Rifai Chair in Islamic Studies at UNC. And I bear very warm greetings from Professor Juliana Hammer, the inaugural holder of the chair, who unfortunately could not be with us on this occasion because of health reasons. I frame the significance of the Kenan Rifai chairs in terms of the much larger context of education in the modern world. The philosopher Alasdair MacIntyre, in his book After Virtue, has persuasively argued that the contemporary age has faced a crisis in the field of ethics, as previous moral orders linked to traditional religious authorities have been eroded and marginalized by the emergence of the nation state. The secular space of the nation state, which privatizes religion and claims a monopoly on religious violence, on legitimate violence, holds a dubious position when it comes to morality. Considerations of state security and strategy take absolute priority, with the result that ethical judgments become a luxury for the few and necessity is invoked in a way that makes justice secondary. MacIntyre regards this as the failure of the Enlightenment project. In this situation, he recommends as a remedy the formation of communities based on tradition, and he began by specifically recommending the ethical teachings of Aristotle. Now, when critics questioned the viability of asserting Aristotle's ethics as a universal framework, MacIntyre proposed the possibility of accepting multiple concepts of justice. He said, since there are a diversity of traditions of inquiry with histories, there are, so it will turn out, rationalities rather than rationality, just as it will also turn out that there are justices rather than justice. It may also be observed that this concept of diverse ethical communities is in consonance with key texts from the Quran, which specifically recognizes the multiplicity of religious traditions while calling on people of different faiths to strive to be first in doing what is best. Istabaqul khairat. That is, to compete on the field of ethics. And I would add that the example we have just been hearing about the Chinese formulation of Islam in relation to Confucian ethics is a perfect example of the employment of a tremendous local tradition of ethical practice. How does this insight apply to modern education? The modern university is barely 200 years old. A product of the Enlightenment, the university was famously defined by Immanuel Kant as an educational institution that would be free from political or religious control. The public university, particularly in the United States, has become a location that is favorable to the free development of critical inquiry about the role of religion in human societies. And this discussion can be joined by anyone who's willing to engage in scholarly argument, regardless of religious background. The space of the university is therefore an especially appropriate place for the development of new ethical communities as proposed by MacIntyre, with the provision that they should not be defined by nationality, race, or religion. The Kenan Rifai chairs in the USA and China are poised to be the pivotal centers for such an ethical community. The Kenan Rifai Distinguished Professorship of Islamic Studies, launched in 2009, and with its inaugural appointment of Professor Juliana Hammer in 2011, plays a vital role in Islamic studies scholarship in the United States. UNC's program in Islamic studies has been developing for over 20 years, has gone through a rigorous process of developing a clear sense of mission and strategic planning. With valuable collaboration and partnership with colleagues like Bruce Lawrence from Duke University, we articulated the project of taking Islamic studies out of the narrow confines of Orientalism and connecting it with the full range of disciplines of the humanities and social sciences. In a country like America, which is unfortunately afflicted by strong anti-Islamic prejudice or Islamophobia, it is critically important that we create an engagement with humanistic and social science research. This engagement is designed to make Islamic studies accessible to non-specialists and to bring the study of Islam into the normal curriculum, which is now dominated by Eurocentrism. Juliana Hammer's research and teaching, which focuses on Islam and gender, Islam in America, and Sufism, directly addresses the important challenges faced by Islamic studies today. And as she is the co-chair of the Study of Islam section of the American Academy of Religion, a position to which she was elected by her colleagues, she has become a national leader in the field of Islamic studies. And this is out of the text, but I would just like to point out something that may be a little surprising to all of you. Religious studies in America is an enormous field of study. There are over 1,400 colleges and universities that have departments of religious studies as an academic field. This does not exist in Europe, where they have departments of theology on the one hand, or area studies on the other. But the academic study of religion connected to the humanities and social sciences is a very American way of dealing with pluralism and diversity. Now, I'm proud to say that in our own program, 9 scholars of Islamic studies have graduated with a PhD from UNC since 2003. And we currently have 10 more studying with us at various stages of the PhD. The undergraduates who study with us are numbered in the hundreds every year. I have just one class with over 180 students for early Islamic civilization. Our graduates now teach in religious studies departments at distinguished colleges and universities around the US and Canada. And while our dear friend Omid Safi has shifted to another responsibility at nearby Duke University and is continuing to work with us, we soon will be hosting a postdoctoral fellow in Islamic studies who we hope will be able to join our faculty on a permanent basis to strengthen us again in the teaching and advising. So that's a very brief sketch of what's happening at University of North Carolina. It's having a huge impact. Now, I'm much less familiar with Peking University, although it's unquestionably one of the top universities, if not the top university in China, and we regard it as a peer university at UNC. And I'll just mention that the Times Higher Education World University Rankings lists UNC Chapel Hill as number 46 and Peking University as number 48. The study of religion has been a particular challenge in China, as Bill and Sachiko's paper has pointed out. The Maoist revolution, official policies suppressing religion, combined with a very distinctive cultural history. In other words, Chinese intellectuals were not actually sure if the concept of religion really applied in China. But leaving that aside, many Chinese intellectuals do not have the tools to understand religion from an academic perspective. And I'll just mention that I'm expecting a visiting scholar next year at UNC from China who is now teaching in Xinjiang at the principal university for the Muslim Hui people. And he's coming to UNC precisely because he needs to gain familiarity with the study of religion. for which he really has no background. Now, I think it's very appropriate that the Kenan Rifai Chair in Beijing has been structured in a very different way to bring in visiting scholars to showcase the results and methodologies of research in Islamic studies and to consider the very important needs that Bill and Sachiko were discussing of the study of the Chinese Muslim tradition. And I had a chance to speak recently with Dr. Avani, who has been a holder of the Kenan Rifai Chair in China. I met him in Tehran a couple of months ago, and he was so enthusiastic about the possibilities there. Now, I have one more thing to say, and I'll conclude with this. UNC's approach to Islamic studies aims not only at integration with the academic disciplines, but also at reaching larger audiences through the arts and cultural performances. I'm currently working with Emil Kang, Executive Director of Carolina Performing Arts, on the programming of over 20 performances to be held at UNC in the 2016-17 season. The theme, inspiring the entire art season for that year, will be a classic work of Sufi literature, the Mantiqoter, or Conference of the Birds by Fariduddin Attar. Together, Emil Kang and I are visiting a number of countries. We've just been to Indonesia, and we're going to Senegal in a few weeks to audition performers. As a complement to the performing arts season, we also plan to hold 2 international conferences that year. The first conference is to be held in the fall of 2016 at UNC, bringing scholars from different fields to discuss the changing concepts, classifications, and boundaries of religious identities in the modern era. The second conference is to take place at another location internationally in the spring of 2017, and I have proposed a topic of Sufism and culture, dealing with Sufism as mediated through the arts and local cultures from different regions of the world. It is my hope that we could plan for this second conference to take place in Istanbul in collaboration with colleagues and institutions here. And I hope also that we can begin to interact with Peking University in some of our activities, perhaps beginning in the fall. This would be a fitting implementation of the educational missions of all our institutions, collaborating at the highest level of international cooperation. It would also be in harmony with the global and cosmopolitan vision of education formulated by Kenan Rifai, which would make available the intellectual capital of Sufi tradition without the authoritarian overtones of earlier times. And finally, I think it may be possible that the development of new programs here in Turkey could benefit from the perspectives of interdisciplinary religious studies as a way of opening up new conversations that are so seriously needed. So I had another long passage to quote from a Sufi text, which I will set aside since the hour is late, and simply propose: we have an immense opportunity ahead of us, and we have been shown the way by the establishment of this partnership starting in Turkey and extending to Chapel Hill and Peking, and I am looking forward to working with you on this amazing possibility. Thank you very much.
Bu kapanış panelinin son konuşmacısı Türk Kadınları
The last speaker of this panel is the head of the TÜRKAT Istanbul branch, our beloved teacher Cemâlnur Sargut. With all her devotion, she is actually a soldier, an a rücül of gönül, of illuminated heart. So I would actually also refer to others who said about her, the Rabia of this era. That's what I've heard others saying. And the title is the evaluation of Kenan Rifai's perspective in the past, today, and in the future. I'm so happy. For the 63 year of my life, this is my dream coming true. I'm extremely happy. Seriously, Islam in the world, I have now 4 people here who are really are warriors of Islam, seriously doing jihad for Islam. They have devoted all their lives to Islam. I don't know whether Carl remembers that our sisterhood, brotherhood actually started in 2000, early 2000, when I first actually read poetry from Anne-Marie Cemal. He came close to me and asked, "Where do you know this?" And I said, "I know it from my teacher, Samia Ayverdi's book that she, Anne-Marie Cemal, referred to." And then he came to me crying, and that same year, when Kenan Gürsoy was present in Milano, I think, as far as I remember, before priests, he mentioned my teacher Kenan Rifai. This happened after 2000 we met. So what he thought was Kenan Rifai is a big Sufi, a great mutasawwif, and his perspective would actually spread the real understanding of Islam. That's what I've understood from him. My teacher says the following, which actually confirms what Carl is saying. Tasawwuf starts with humanity. It's actually an individual kind of entity that is freed of humanity, of religion concern, and the Cemal, the perfection, is found in Islam. And since it actually embraces all, it's like an exploding volcano. Since the volcano's lava cannot be held with the palm of a hand, and there is no other force that can actually stop tasawwuf, prevent tasawwuf from flowing into the soil, into the ground of the earth. So as we can see, from the west to the east, Allah's meaning, mana, spirit, is actually being explained with all directions. I don't know what to say. I've prepared so many things. Maybe I will be saying some other things. East was actually my dream, being the far east, and west being the far west. Why in the east? Because the hadith says, seek knowledge even in China, and especially in Ibn Arabi said the last perfected human being will come from China. So that has also affected me. I thank Allah every day because I have friends like Chittick and Murata, because they really understand Islam. They really explain and teach it very effectively. They are great teachers. They have initiated confusion and Islam pleasure, the pleasure of learning and knowing Confucian and Islam in China. They don't actually know, but in the conference that we've organized this year in China, the Chinese students came to me saying how important, how significant an event this is. You can't imagine. Chinese Islam was only consisting of praying and fasting, because unfortunately Wahhabi Islam is about to be spread. But now that's Chitticks have started and Avani going on with their interpretations, with the studies on Hazreti Mevlana. We are learning the real meaning of Islam religion, and Chinese Muslims have started to learn their religion from this chair. So in this way, such a bright future is actually being presented to us So we want to go and learn Islam from Chittick and then spread around everywhere in China and teach Islam. So as Chittick has very rightfully said, the Turkish Muslims there, the Uyghur Muslims were asking for us, please send us Mesnevî. We will read Mesnevî. Will there be no rights for us? They said in Pekin, they asked in Pekin University whether Islam is not going to be taught at universities, and Du said that's the first time that has ever happened when a Uyghur Muslim is actually asking for his right in the context of university. So Kenan Rifai's fabulous vision is now open. Omid Safi, my dear son, mentioned a story. The Turks who live in Rum, Diyar-i Rum, and the Chinese, the Turkish people living in Diyar-i Rum then. Chinese actually drew a beautiful, fabulous picture that was as beautiful as a material painting. Material knowledge actually really affects people, so it was so bright and effective. And the Turks who lived in Asia Minor, in Rumeli, Diyar-i Mur, they just polished that wall. So, and all this beautiful picture is reflected on this empty, polished wall. So all these beauties should be reflected on the polished wall. And that's only when beauty is manifest. So the ilim of illuminated heart is actually like the language of bird that would appeal to everyone, because he is the manifestation of the hadith say, time is Allah. This is an exploding, mold-breaking hadith. Time is Allah. Why is it so surprising? Because Allah sometimes says that Allah says, I can be manifest in a tree. So who manifests in time? It's actually Allah's attributes. So they are the fathers of time. They are the human being of each and every era. The best example for this is when Kenan Rifai actually gave the first notebook he wrote to my mother. It was actually a Confucian teaching. The notes were about Confucian teaching. That was a comparative study of Confucian teaching and Mevlana. When I said this to Professor Du, he was so amazed, so shocked. And as you can see, all the religions are embraced, but one foot being stable in the Sharia, and like Rumi said, with the other foot being together with the 72 peoples, Hazreti Kenan Rifai is actually making us serve people so that the real Islam will be explained. I am 63 years old and 34 kilos. I'm a miracle for most people, but really being full of Allah's love make you act all the time. And this is what Kenan Rifai does. It's the energy that he gives me. It's actually him that sends Eylül to Harvard penniless, and sends Fahir and Cangüzel to the States and make them serve Islam. So with numerous students in black, with purple Eflatun headscarves they have, serving only for God of love, for Ashk is his energy. This energy actually initiated 2 chairs yesterday, and tomorrow he will be doing some other tasks. So what is it that we are planning to do? I would like to share with you. The first is, inshallah, we would like to initiate a chair in Oxford University. This is actually for the young researchers who complete their PhD degree, so that they can actually be a member of the fellowship program and pursue their post-PhD studies. So they will carry out their own research and will also offer courses. So these courses will be done in master level as well as PhD level. It's actually the Oxford University that has asked us to do so. Why do you think they have actually asked us to do it? Because it's the Wahhabi Islam being spread, and we don't want that. So I actually strongly believe in the fact that if Allah wants something, it is actually Allah that makes it successful. So we are now waiting for the right time, for Allah's time to happen, for it to take place. For the first time, we have now established an institute, a Tasavvuf institute at a university in Istanbul called Üsküdar University. And this university serves three purposes. The first one, as we have been talking about, the main aim of Islam, the greatest problem in this world, which is ahlaki Muhammadi. So it's to spread Muhammad's beautiful conduct. And certificate program is now running. The meaning of Tasawwuf, Ibn Arabi and Mevlana texts are analyzed and discussed. And there are so many applicants waiting in the waiting list. And our teachers have started teaching. And inshallah, the second certificate program is going to be opened, and the applicants are already full now. Perhaps they are not master's or PhD degree kind of studies, but they address a wider audience. So the second one is the graduate level programs. To start graduate level programs, first time in Turkey, people who are coming from different fields of education. For example, a psychologist coming to the course, a psychologist without knowing Rumi, without knowing Arabic and Persian, how can he actually cure a person? I think even the psychiatrists now know that you can't cure a person without knowing Rumi. So like engineers like myself and lawyers and teachers, we have to actually open the way, the path to really be able to become human beings. At least they can learn Persian and Arabic so that they can go further in their career and reading. So Persian and Arabic, being competent in those two languages is very important. But as we know, the Quran cannot be learned just by knowing Arabic, because it's Allah's language. It is the language of the illuminated heart. Like James Morris said, so James Morris actually nodded in the places where really Turkish speakers pinpointed important spiritual events. So he, not knowing Turkish, was able to understand the hearts. Kenan Rifai's poetry we have. There are the poetry being translated by Asuman Kulaksız and Aylin, and these are very important sources of tasawwuf. And beside this, in Süleymaniye Library, there is a lot of manuscripts that is not open to public. Only 20% is now known. So we will actually try to encourage these texts to be taught in universities together with my colleagues coming from the West, and spread the Islamic tasawwuf understanding that is derived from Ottoman culture to the whole world. That is the mission Kenan Rifai is actually make us perform, inshallah. I may not be able to see all of them, but I'm so certain that even though we can't do anything ourselves, we have tried to raise much more qualified students than ourselves. So when I see them talk, I just open my hands and thank Allah, like Samia Anne did, that whatever we did today, they're going to be doing much more. So even in Japan, inshallah, the chair under Kenan Rifai's name will be opened with the help of Sachiko Murata, with her enormous support, spiritual support. This is my red apple to spread Islam in Japan. May Allah bestow this upon us, inshallah, and make it come true. There may be people saying that we're not academic enough, and what I'd like to say to them is that I'm not academic. We are just trying to convey the understanding of academia of our teachers. So all this beauty belongs to our teacher. Our teacher is a real perfected human being. Just a session ago, Asuman Kulaksız and Yekta gave beautiful examples. And Turgut abi also mentioned a real Mürşid-i Kamil who is Samia Ayverdi. Very beautifully explained. We are following their footsteps. The love of Allah, the love of the Prophet, and ahlak-ı Muhammad is what we're trying to explain, which is what will save this world. This kind of an understanding of Tasavvuf. Kenan actually thanked us because we're not emotional, but I said to myself how I wish Kenan would wait and hear mine. We are servants, we are happy to serve, and may Allah actually exalt the souls who have taught us to serve. Like Turgut abi said, we are in unity of sources, coming together shoulder to shoulder with all my friends coming from the West and with all the audience present here and my students. May Allah be content with them. I am so thankful to my mother and I bow before her presence. Thank you very much.
I would also like to thank to you all. I was even forbidden from thanking. That was my trial as well, but I would like to thank to you too, my dear Cemâlnur Hoca.
Kıldım
Efendim tüm katılımcıları sahneye davet ediyoruz. Lütfen bir fotoğraf çekimi için. Lütfen. O küçücük odada çevirilerde çalışan arkadaşlarımıza da gönülden sevgiler. Canım.
Efendim izin verirseniz İstanbul Belediyesi'ne de çok müteşekkiriz. Yaptıklarını ödemek mümkün değil. Bu programın ana bütün programlarını, yemeklerine kadar, içmeklerine kadar bize finanse ettiler. Hiçbir şey de istemeden kendileri istediler. Allah razı olsun hepsinden.
Sahneye hemen Hümanur Bağlı'yı rica ediyorum. Bu güzel tasarımı hazırlayan Kenan Rifai Rahmet Kapısı. Hümanur'u hemen alalım. İsim söylemeye lütfen gerek kalmasın. Buyurun.